Rachel Monroe wasn't your typical mechanic. By day, she worked under the hood of cars at a small-town garage, grease on her hands and sweat on her brow. By night, she was a devoted mother, doing everything she could to provide for her 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Life hadn't been easy. Raising a child on her own meant skipping meals, sleepless nights, and working double shifts just to keep the lights on. But through it all, Rachel never complained. Her hands were calloused, but her heart was soft. She had a quiet strength that inspired everyone who knew her. Neighbors often said she was the kind of woman who would give you the coat off her back and then ask if you needed shoes too. While she didn't have much, she made sure Lily had everything: a warm bed, homemade lunches, and bedtime stories filled with hope. Even when her car broke down or rent was late, Rachel faced each challenge with grit and grace. In a world that often felt cold and unfair, she held on to kindness like it was her superpower. Little did she know, one ordinary day at the shop would set in motion a chain of events that would not only change her life, but bring long-buried secrets into the light. One warm afternoon, Rachel was wrapping up her last job of the day when an expensive black SUV rolled into her modest auto shop, steam pouring from beneath the hood. The driver stepped out clean-cut, obviously from out of town, and clearly frustrated. "Radiators blown," Rachel said after a quick glance. "I can get you patched up well enough to reach the next city." He looked skeptical. She was covered in grease, wearing worn jeans and a tired ball cap, but her confidence was steady. Without asking for payment up front, Rachel grabbed her tools and got to work, her hands moving with practiced skill. She had no idea she was helping Brandon Whitaker, a wealthy businessman, on a road trip to clear his head from boardroom chaos. While waiting, Brandon noticed something on her left hand. Glinting in the sunlight was a delicate sapphire ring. His eyes locked onto it. "That ring! Where did you get it?" he asked, almost breathless. Rachel paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "It was a gift from someone when I was a kid, at the orphanage. I've kept it ever since." Brandon's heart skipped. He had given that exact ring to a girl named Rachel at the orphanage over 20 years ago before being adopted by the powerful Whitaker family. It had been a promise between two lost children to find each other again one day. He'd spent years wondering what had become of her. It suddenly hit him. The mechanic who had just generously helped him, who worked tirelessly to raise her son and keep her dignity intact, was that Rachel, the girl he once loved. This wasn't just a chance encounter, it was fate, pulling two broken pieces back together at the perfect moment. The moment Rachel mentioned the orphanage, something shifted in Brandon's eyes. Emotions he'd long buried came rushing back, memories of cold nights, whispered promises, and a little girl with fierce determination in her eyes. He had wondered about her for years, but never imagined their paths would cross like this. Still, he needed proof. He asked her about the name of the orphanage. When she said it aloud, his heart sank. It was the same place where he'd spent the first 7 years of his life before being adopted by Carter Whitaker, a man he once saw as a savior, but now knew was something far different. Later that evening, Brandon returned with old photos, grainy snapshots from a forgotten childhood. As they sat together in the back of Rachel's garage, the past began to unfold. She pointed to a picture of them playing near a swing set. "That was the last day I saw you," she whispered. "They told me you were adopted by a family out of state, and that you didn't want to say goodbye." Brandon froze. That wasn't what he remembered. His adoption had been rushed, handled by lawyers Carter had hired. There hadn't been a goodbye, just a car, a contract, and a new name. Suddenly, things weren't adding up. Determined to uncover the truth, Brandon began digging into his father's records. What he found shocked him. sealed documents showing large donations to the orphanage timed perfectly with his adoption, legal threats used to silence the staff, and worst of all, proof that Carter had paid to erase Rachel from the system, ensuring Brandon would forget her and focus on the future the Whitakers had built for him. The puzzle was clear now. Carter hadn't just adopted Brandon out of kindness, he'd orchestrated it, knowing the boy's heritage might someday threaten his empire. Rachel wasn't just a forgotten childhood friend. She was the key to exposing a lifetime of lies, and Brandon realized it was time to face the man who'd controlled him for far too long. Fueled by the shocking truth, Rachel and Brandon knew they couldn't stay silent. For too long, Carter Whitaker's name had been protected by wealth, fear, and carefully buried secrets. But now, armed with proof and a shared determination, the two set out to expose him. Brandon reached out to people from his past former employees of the Whitaker estate, childhood tutors, and even a retired housekeeper who had once hinted at knowing too much. Rachel, meanwhile, tapped into her own community, finding others who had crossed paths with Carter's ruthless business deals. What started as a quiet investigation quickly became a mission for justice. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Land grabs that pushed families off their property, forged contracts, threats made in back rooms. Carter had built his empire by stepping on the very people who trusted him. Rachel's uncle, a mechanic who lost everything when Carter bought out the garage, came forward with documents he'd hidden for years. Another man, whose mother had worked at the orphanage, provided a taped interview from decades ago, detailing how children were placed based on backdoor deals rather than actual adoptions. As Rachel and Brandon compiled the evidence, news began to spread. Local reporters caught wind of the investigation, and past victims, many of whom had lost hope, started speaking up. One woman even sent a handwritten letter thanking Rachel for standing up when no one else had the courage. "You reminded us that we matter," she wrote. Still, Carter wasn't going down without a fight. His legal team tried intimidation, threats, even a settlement offer, but Brandon refused to be bought. For the first time in his life, he was standing up not just as Carter Whitaker's son, but as Brandon the brother, the friend, the man who believed in doing the right thing. With mounting pressure and undeniable evidence, a court date was finally set. The people Carter had wronged were finally going to be heard. And for Rachel and Brandon, this wasn't just about revenge, it was about rewriting the ending of a story that had been stolen from them years ago. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the benches. Victims sat shoulder to shoulder, and Rachel stood next to Brandon, both of them holding their breath. After months of digging, sleepless nights, and the weight of impossible memories, the moment had come. Carter Whitaker would finally face the truth. The prosecution presented the evidence meticulously: forged deeds, secret recordings, testimonies from silenced employees, orphanage staff, and displaced homeowners. Rachel's uncle delivered a powerful account of how Carter's manipulation had destroyed lives under the guise of charity and corporate success. Brandon took the stand, not as the son of a tycoon, but as a man seeking accountability for a legacy built on lies. The sapphire ring was shown as exhibit a proof of a promise broken and lives altered forever. Carter tried to maintain control, but the cracks showed. His cold composure faltered under cross-examination. Each fact presented chipped away at the carefully crafted image he had cultivated for decades. And when the jury delivered the verdict guilty on multiple counts of fraud, coercion, and conspiracy, an audible gasp filled the room. Justice had been served. In the weeks that followed, the Whitaker name fell from public grace. Stock in Carter's company plummeted, board members resigned, and a government investigation into his business empire began. The sprawling estate was seized, assets frozen, and charities once under Carter's control were placed in independent hands. The people he'd silenced were finally seen and heard. Rachel and Brandon didn't celebrate with champagne or headlines. Instead, they returned to the orphanage where it all began. With donations pouring in from supporters across the country, they helped rebuild it not as a place of hidden sorrow, but as a real home for children who deserved love and dignity. The past had been painful, but it no longer defined them. The truth, once buried, had set them and countless others free. When the dust settled, Rachel and Brandon didn't chase the spotlight. There were no television interviews, no press conferences, no celebratory posts. Instead, they quietly turned their focus to healing and rebuilding, not just for themselves, but for the countless lives impacted by Carter Whitaker's decades of greed. The orphanage, once a place filled with unanswered questions and silent pain, became their starting point. Brandon poured his resources into restoring the building, new beds, fresh paint, updated classrooms, and most importantly, trained, loving staff. Rachel used her hands not just to fix engines, but to build a workshop where kids could learn real-life skills: welding, carpentry, basic mechanics. She believed every child deserved the tools to shape their future, just like she had to fight for hers. The community rallied behind them. People who had once been afraid to speak came forward. Former employees of the Whitaker Corporation, residents of stolen land, and distant relatives who had been cast aside all shared their stories. Together, they formed a coalition to advocate for business transparency, ethical land practices, and child protection reform. But perhaps the most powerful transformation was internal. Brandon, once trapped in the expectations of wealth and legacy, embraced a new life grounded in truth and compassion. He legally changed his name, dropping the Whitaker surname, and donated a large portion of his inheritance to support foster care reform and legal aid for underprivileged families. Rachel, though still humble and grounded, finally allowed herself to breathe. She was no longer just the single mom working late nights at the auto shop. She was a voice for justice, a builder of safe spaces, and a living example that kindness, when coupled with courage, can dismantle even the most untouchable empires. At a small ceremony 1 year later, surrounded by children from the orphanage, volunteers, and community leaders, Brandon presented Rachel with something she never expected: the sapphire ring, now framed in glass, with a new inscription etched beneath it, for the promise kept. They didn't call it an ending. It was a beginning, a new chapter, born not from wealth or revenge, but from integrity, love, and the unshakable belief that doing what's right is always worth it. Because sometimes, the smallest acts, like helping fix a stranger's car, can spark the kind of change that rewrites lives.